Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first practice-focused session of our AI in Practice series. We'll go ahead and start with brief introductions. My name is Griffin Wonderlich, and I'm an associate in our corporate and M&A practice group. I've been with Koley Jessen since 2020, and my practice primarily focuses on middle market private equity transactions and related day-to-day general corporate work for their portfolio companies.
I'm Emily Bodfield, and I'm also an associate here at Koley in our M&A practice group. I've been here since 2020, and like Griffin, my practice revolves mainly around buy-side work, primarily with private equity companies, but I also do a fair amount of sell-side work with founder-owned companies.
Now I'm Charlie Reeder. I'm a senior analyst in the M&A practice group alongside Griffin and Emily. I began at Koley in 2024, and I assist the associates and partners on M&A transactions.
We launched this series with one simple goal: to pull back the curtain on how law firms are actually using AI. There's a lot of conversation around the technology itself, but far less discussion about what legal professionals and attorneys are doing with it day in and day out, and what it enables us to do for our clients. Through this series, we hope to share practical examples of how AI is being integrated into our legal workflows every single day, while also providing some ideas that you can apply within your own organization.
During our prior kickoff session in this series, we took a high-level look at the AI tools our firm is using. So today we're going to take the next step by focusing on one specific area of practice: mergers and acquisitions. Within our presentation today, we'll explore where AI is creating efficiencies within transaction workflows, how we're incorporating AI into our processes, and then finally what that means for both attorneys and our clients. Before we dive in here, and while we will fulfill our lawyerly obligation to share today's disclaimer, here are a few quick housekeeping notes for you all. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find the webinar navigation menu, which provides access to additional resources and materials for today's presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them using the Q&A feature. We'll reserve some time at the end of today's session to address as many questions as possible. And then following today's webcast, a recording will be made available on demand through our Koley Jessen website. To give you a quick look ahead at our presentation, we'll start with some of the high-level ways AI is reshaping the M&A workflow. We'll then move on to discuss how we're applying these tools within our practice, including a look at 3 use cases and demonstrations that bring those applications to life. We're also going to spend a few minutes discussing one of the most important skills in working effectively with AI: prompting. And then finally, we'll touch on some of the current limitations of AI and where these tools continue to face challenges.
Thanks, Emily. So how it relates to AI shaping M&A workflows, the growth and continued use of AI has significantly impacted the M&A and legal universe. And as these software tools become widely available, whether it's an enterprise-based Claude license or just a free ChatGPT account, there's a diverse range of knowledge and information that is available at our fingertips whenever we want it. And when you think about the legal field, this saves significant amount of time on processes that used to be manual and take many hours. And so as you think about M&A transactions specifically, the diligence that we conduct on a seller can be much more detailed, and we can produce work product and reports that have significantly more complexity and detail, and these can be completed in a lot less time than they used to be. And so with that time savings that comes from leveraging these tools, our attorneys, and especially our partners, are able to continually shift more of their time towards a more strategy and advisor-based role to help advise our clients.
So those are some of the ways that AI is beginning to reshape transaction workflows, but let's get more specific. The next question is, what does that actually look like in practice? We were each tasked with coming up with an example of how we have recently utilized legal AI tools in our day-to-day, and we're excited to share with you today. To illustrate that, let's walk through an example of how we are becoming more efficient in analyzing competing drafts of documents and evaluating a lot of dense information under a quick timeline. One area where AI, and Harvey specifically, has created significant efficiencies is the review and comparison of competing buyer markups. In this first demonstration, we'll walk through how we've streamlined that process using a Harvey workflow. Here's the situation. On a sell-side transaction where we're running a competitive auction process with multiple prospective buyers, Koley Jessen will often prepare an auction draft purchase agreement. That draft is posted to the data room and circulated to the potential buyers as part of the bid process, and we generally ask buyers to submit markups of this draft along with the rest of their bid materials. These auction drafts are usually seller favorable starting points, and each bidder's revisions tend to focus on different deal points, structuring changes, and other material items. As you can see, this is a lengthy purchase agreement, 53 pages, and the expected markups for these drafts are usually pretty substantial. Here, we're looking at different bidder markups of a recent anonymized auction draft we put together, and as you can see, they all focused on different deal points throughout the draft. When you're in the thick of it on an auction process, as the bids from potential buyers start getting submitted, time is really of the essence in selecting which party or parties will move on to the next stage. Generally, the bankers and the seller parties will review the economic points of each bid, and the attorneys would have a day or two to review and summarize the key terms of the legal markups. However, because the competitive auction process often includes a long potential list of buyers, each of which is submitting a heavily marked draft of the contract, attorneys might not have as much time as necessary to conduct a full review and fully evaluate the competing markups. However, with Harvey and AI generally, we're able to compare these different markups against our auction draft much more thoroughly, quickly, and efficiently. To do that, we've created a Harvey workflow. A workflow is a repeatable process that allows Harvey to perform a series of predefined steps and analyses automatically. It's particularly useful for recurring tasks like this one because it helps standardize the process and significantly reduces manual review time. Here, we've already built out the prompting and analysis framework on the back end. So first thing we'll do is follow the instructions shown here. We'll upload the auction draft purchase agreement, which was the first draft circulated to potential buyers in the data room. We'll submit, and then it will ask us to upload each bidder's markup to that agreement. Once those documents are uploaded, we'll submit them to the workflow and let Harvey perform its analysis. We'll go ahead and fast forward through most of that process for purposes of this demo. Now that the workflow is processing, we can see that Harvey has broken down each purchase agreement and each buyer's markup. Here at the top, it provides a high-level summary of the changes that were made by each bidder. However, what we really care about is the matrix that Harvey creates down here at the bottom. This matrix compares the deal terms and variables that matter most to us. It starts with the baseline position from auction draft purchase agreement and then shows each bidder's position and how it differs from that baseline. I'll note that these deal terms included in the matrix can be customized depending on what's important to that particular transaction. We've configured this workflow to focus on key items such as enterprise value, deal structure, rollover equity, reps and warranties insurance, exclusivity, restrictive covenants, and similar deal points. Because the purchase agreements we're looking at are redacted, the matrix doesn't contain the full level of detail we would typically see when analyzing bidder markups, but you get the idea. With this, you can see how effectively Harvey identifies and compares each bidder's position against the baseline agreement. For example, if we look at the deal points here, particularly let's look at indemnification and survival. We can compare the proposed structure from each of the three bidders here. Bidder 1 revised our proposed full walkaway structure by adding seller indemnity for fundamental representations and pre-closing taxes. Bidder 2 built out a more fulsome seller indemnity package in addition to the RWI policy. And bidder 3 similarly unwound our baseline proposal of a no indemnity deal structure. Here, we are able to quickly review and confirm that bidder 1's proposed structure is most favorable to our position as seller. Another example worth highlighting here is the changes to closing conditions. Bidder 1 proposed additional financing conditions. Bidder 2 added multiple walkaway rights, including a diligence out. And bidder 3 proposed doing away with sign and later closing altogether in favor of a sign and simultaneous closing structure. This comparison table helps us quickly review buyer options in a tight timeline and share our thoughts on approach in an easily digestible format with bankers and sellers. This is exactly the type of information Harvey helps surface quickly. Without a tool like this, we would be manually reviewing each markup independently, summarizing key terms across all submissions, and then organizing our analysis and recommendations from there. By automatically organizing and comparing these terms in a single matrix, Harvey makes the review process significantly more efficient, understandable, and thorough in evaluating competing bids in a tight time.
Thanks, Griffin. That was a great example of how AI can help organize and analyze large amounts of information more efficiently in the deal process. Another area where we're seeing value is in leveraging prior deal experience. While every transaction is different, as you know, many of the issues that arise aren't entirely new with each transaction. AI can help attorneys more quickly identify relevant prior work product and negotiated solutions, making it easier to draw on the collective experience of the firm. If you joined us for our kickoff presentation, you saw this type of technology briefly in action. For our next demonstration, we'll look at how it can be used to streamline contract review in a transaction setting using our Clause platform. For our next demo, we're going to use Clause AI to assist with NDA review. So in this scenario, we're representing a private equity buyer reviewing and revising an NDA that they've received from a target company. So the first thing that we'll do is make sure the clause app is open and track changes is turned on. Let's first take a look at the assist feature. So over here we have the assistant feature, which works similarly to ChatGPT or any other AI chat tool. You'll type in a request and it just makes the change directly in the document using track changes. For example, if we simply want to shorten the NDA term to 18 months, we just type in that instruction and we'll tell clause to do that. And you'll see here it's going to make the revision directly for us in the agreement. So this tool is the most useful for small isolated edits or quick light touch reviews. However, say you want to do a full review of an NDA according to preset rules and policies. That's where this other tool, Playbooks, comes in handy. And this is where you store your review rules and policies. So here you can see we have a number of playbooks that have different rules and policies. For example, this first one defines what qualifies as confidential information. Down here, we have a policy describing who needs to be included in the definition of a representative. So it requires the definition to include certain individuals. We have affiliates, officers, directors, employees. And then here's another policy requiring certain representatives to comply with specific obligations under the agreement. These policies are also pretty straightforward to create. You can just enter a pre-existing playbook and clause will convert it into an individual policy, or you can also just build them directly in the app and edit as needed, for a specific client or repeat document. So once we're set on our policies, we'll select a playbook that we want to apply, choose which party we represent. So here we're the recipient, and then select our mode. So here we'll choose the fast mode, but you can also choose the thoughtful mode for a more detailed review. And then click run. So now clause is analyzing the NDA against our policies, identifying where changes are needed, and then it will apply those changes directly in the document using the track changes format. The processing here typically takes up to a couple of minutes, depending on the length and complexity of the agreement. And then obviously for the thoughtful review, it will require a couple more minutes for processing. To put that into perspective, a manual review of an NDA might take 20 to 40 minutes. So with clause, that markup is completed in a fraction of that time. And then all that's left for the attorney is to verify the changes for accuracy and make any deal-specific adjustments, as we talked about earlier in our presentation. So for the purposes of this demo, we were skipping ahead to the actual output. So here you might need to do some minor formatting cleanup, but you can see that each policy has been applied to the agreement. We have the policy requiring the definition of representatives to be expanded. So we've included the other required individuals, investors, financing sources. We've also had several rules governing the employee non-solicit provision, and those changes have been applied here as well. And then back on the right in the clause panel, the tool provides a brief explanation of each change it made and why. So here it's telling us that definition of representatives was expanded to include certain individuals, the employee non-solicit provision was narrowed, and highlights several other changes that clause made to the agreement. So if you wanted to review a specific change in the document, you just simply click the item and then clause will take you directly to that location in the agreement. At the bottom, you'll also see here the notes section that provides additional context on why certain changes were made. And one benefit of all this feedback is that over time, you can really start to identify the gaps in the policies and the playbooks, so you can refine that, especially for clients who have repeat NDA review. So ultimately, after a quick review and any necessary adjustments after the clause has done its work, what has traditionally been, a 30+ minute review can be cut down to 10 or 15 minutes, which makes really a significant difference when you're working through high volume of NDAs like many of our clients are in both the buy side and sell side.
Thanks, Emily, for walking us through that NDA playbook through clause. The final item we're going to be touching on is how we leverage AI in the diligence and contract review process. Complex transactions could have thousands of documents that associates and analysts are analyzing to identify legal flags for our clients. And AI and its software tools can really help make that process more efficient by reviewing the documents alongside us. So I'm now going to jump into a demo to walk you guys through how we leverage the software tool Harvey to help review, identify, and distinguish form agreements that our clients and customers may have. So jumping into our third and final demo, we will be using the software tool Harvey, and you're currently looking at Harvey's homepage, but I will be using the vault function at Harvey that allows us to store and review what could be thousands of documents. And so I'm going to open the AI in Practice vault that I created for this presentation. Now, what a Harvey vault is so great for is allowing AI to help review any documents that we upload in a shared space. So for every M&A transaction, we create a Harvey vault to host all the documents that a seller may provide in their data room. And so this is a one-stop shop that our entire deal team can use to review the agreements. And you can see that I uploaded a batch of 50 customer agreements and 20 supplier agreements into this specific Harvey vault. And then at KJ and within Harvey, we create prompts for repeatable processes that help speed up our timeline. So I'm going to go to the library here and load a prompt that I created to help review form agreements. So you can see our library here. We're going to be using the form agreements identification and in review table prompt. And you can see it's a series of questions that I have asked Harvey to help review as it relates to the form agreements that we know the customer has. So I'm going to select the customer master agreements folder, and we are going to upload each of the 50 agreements that it was provided. And the best use case here is when we know that a seller has a form agreement that they use for their customers. And in this case, they've told us that they use a form, but we don't know how many there are. And we want to know what differentiates each of these forms. So we are going to prompt Harvey to answer these questions. One of them being, what form is this? Form A, B, or C? How many are there? And please differentiate each of those forms. Or what are the change of control provisions or the contract value of this agreement? Or the non-solicitation or non-competition provisions, the questions that we ask it regularly in flag for our clients on an M&A transaction. And so now Harvey is reviewing each of the 50 customer agreements that we provided, and it's going to let us know the amount of different forms that the seller has. And this allows us to, in the case of if there are hundreds or thousands of documents, to not have to review every single one. So Harvey's now asking me to build the review table, and it's going to build a matrix with responses to each of the questions that I asked it for all the agreements. So you can see here now on the left-hand side, there's the 50 files, and it's going to begin exporting responses. You can see it's already answering some of the form questions when I asked it how many forms are there, and you can see it's already beginning to differentiate that there's a form A, B, or C, and it's starting to answer some of our other questions as well. Like, is there a change of control provision, a non-solicitation provision? And so having a review table like this is just so helpful in reviewing and having a one place for all of our contracts. So we can see that clearly Form C is the most popular agreement, and it looks like there might be a couple other forms. It identified a Form A and Form B. But as we look at the Form C, clearly this looks like a more modern and new looking form, which makes sense for having the most of the 50 that we provided it. And then if we take a look at Form A, which there may have been a couple, we can see that that is a much older form that there may not be as many of as it compares to Form to C, which is probably what most customers currently have. So Harvey did a great job identifying those. And then if we look at Form B, looks like another modern form, but looks like there may be some different provisions, at least between Form A and Form B. And you can see on the right-hand side that Harvey, as we look at Form B, it does give us responses and actually an index of all the questions we gave it. So you can see that it does have a change of control provision. Neither party may assign, transfer, or delegate this agreement without the prior written consent of the other party. But then it does say any merger, consolidation, or change of control shall be deemed an assignment. So we know that Form B is a change of control provision that we might need to seek consent for in connection with the transaction. So Harvey helped identify how Form B differentiated from Form A, and you can see the assignment provision there in Section 10. And so this is awesome for identifying form agreements, not only that, but also reviewing the actual provisions within the agreement. And then as we jump back to the vault, what's great about this is we can share the vault with our entire deal teams, including our specialists. And so I'm going to click the share button here in the top right and share with both Griffin and Emily. And I'm also going to give them full access to the vault. And so they'll be able to see the exact contract review table that I just built alongside the prompt. And so they're going to have access to all these files. And if you go in the top right, the queries, you can see that there's both the assist prompt that I gave it alongside the review table. So Harvey has just been such a massive help in allowing us to review these agreements and expedite the process, and really helps give our team a lot more efficiency as it relates to diligence. So now we're going to jump into the power of effective prompting. As law firms have continued to adopt these software tools, it is really key that everyone is using them effectively. And to do so, we cannot emphasize enough the power of guiding your AI tools through prompting. As these continue to improve, the differentiator is now rarely the tool, but it's the prompt and the user himself. Whether it's leveraging a chatbot to provide results on a complex legal ruling or helping distinguish a contract review matrix, the detail that you provide is so critical. And as AI continues to become more prominent and more firms take it on, one of the strongest skill sets that young associates will be able to have is how to effectively communicate and guide these AI tools. We at KJ have already made that a priority, and knowing how to effectively prompt will continue to be a focus of ours going forward. You'll see below on the screen a couple of examples of just very high level of how you can just give it a little bit more context when asking for hopefully a stronger export from the tool. And this can be thought on a way bigger scale as you think about giving the tool a lot more information about a specific M&A transaction.
Thanks, Charlie. While we at Koley are embracing the use of AI and have worked to be on the leading edge of these new technologies, we're also continuously aware of AI's constraints and not allowing it to be a direct replacement for many of the tasks necessary on live deals. As with most things in the legal field, all tasks in the M&A deal process still require some level of human judgment, context, and experience. Our team is continuously cautious of AI's limitations, including some of the items noted here on the screen. So first, negotiation strategy, knowing when certain aspects of a deal require, inputs or separate negotiations or jurisdictional nuances that are critical to a specific deal that might not play into, maybe the precedent you have in your AI tool. Second is regulatory interpretation. As you know, there might be certain antitrust or industry-specific rules that would apply to a specific deal, and as attorneys, you can't rely on AI to identify those for you. Third, and possibly most important, is our ethical judgment. We need to maintain our duty to our client, and our ethical obligations require a certain human discernment, even with using AI products that might be very advanced. Finally, no matter the skill of the AI platform or even the AI input, our attorneys are ultimately responsible for the output in our work product. So we ensure that we are always verifying all of the information and the content of whatever work product we deliver.
As we've highlighted, this is an ongoing series, and you'll hear from different practice groups as we go deeper into specific areas. Up next is AI and employment and how we use the tools at our disposal for labor, benefits, and executive comp. If you'd like to follow along, the QR codes on this slide will help you stay connected. With that, we're happy to open it up and take your questions about anything we've talked about today.
All right, I see we already have a number of questions loaded up in our Q&A feature here, so I'll turn it over to Charlie, who will help moderate as we do the Q&A.
Absolutely. Thanks, Griffin. And thanks to everyone for joining. Griffin, I'm going to start with you for the first question that we got. What are the most common mistakes you are seeing AI tools make when being used in your day-to-day practice?
That's a great question. I would say very frequently it's maybe not as thorough as we would like to see for a large data set, depending on what the task is. There are a lot of ways that we can, make it more tailored or make it more focused or kind of expand, what it's working on. But I think it really takes a lawyer's eye to go through and make sure that nothing got missed and we're not focused too much on the big picture. Sometimes you got to get down in the weeds, and we've seen it struggle with that from time to time. It also doesn't take into account, client preferences. I think a lot of what we do, especially on the buy side kind of work, it's very repetitive and process driven when we're trying to be efficient on a roll-up strategy, for example. And a lot of times it'll miss the mark on just knowing what a client is looking for. And that's another way that we have to monitor and make sure it aligns with expectations. And I would say it's just generally not perfect either. There are a lot of times we'll have it help drafting a provision or asking what's market, and it'll take a sell side approach when we're on the buy side or vice versa. And so, there's a lot of things that we know to be on the lookout for and alert for. And those are, just a few common mistakes we've seen from time to time.
For sure. and I think you speak on behalf of the firm when you say that. Emily, I'm going to throw the next question over to you about the playbook that you showed. Who actually builds a playbook for something like this, and when does it make sense for a client to have a playbook?
Totally, yeah. So the person that's actually building the playbook is the KJ attorney, but we're building this in conjunction with our clients. So we can either use clients' existing policies and rules that they have for a certain document, or we can create it from scratch in discussions with the client. So for example, for NDAs, a lot of times certain clients who are doing mass NDA review or markups, they have like a flow chart. If the other party comes back with this comment, here's what we're going to do. And that might be a multi-step flow chart. So we can use that already built out flow chart to create the rules and policies in a clause. To the second part of your question, like when it makes sense for someone to have a full playbook like this in this clause AI tool, it's really for repeat documents, like I explained. So obviously the most common example or best example is probably NDA review. But this could be used for a lot of other things if there's repeat negotiations. So that might possibly be like a master agreement used with customers if there's like typical pushback points from customers. I wouldn't say it's necessarily helpful if it's a document that is really specific to a certain deal, or you're not marking up frequently, because the time to put in to build out the playbook and like think about it with the attorney might not be as productive if it's a less negotiated agreement or happens less often.
For sure. I'll take the next one that just came in. Speaking into the Harvey contract review, does Harvey contract summary completely replace manual review? How and are you still reviewing these contracts? So I would just say like the process has completely changed over the past couple of years, and even in the past several months when it comes to contract review. Harvey and other AI tools are absolutely not replacing the review of these contracts at all. They're expediting the process, and they're firsthand and immediately flagging the provisions that we're wanting to see, but we are still reviewing these contracts. An instance where maybe we would look over the contracts much quicker is like what I showed in the tool video. When we have a bunch of form agreements, we know they're on the same form, and maybe there's hundreds or thousands of them. But for any supplier agreements, we're still reviewing those, but the AI tools do a great job of flagging the key provisions so we know exactly where to look, and also maybe flagging provisions that we weren't anticipating or weren't previously looking for. But Harvey and these tools are completely and absolutely not replacing review as a whole. I'm going to throw the next question over to Griffin. How we are managing adoption of AI in the workplace. Obviously, we have a wide range of ages and experience at the firm. How are we managing internal use of AI at an enterprise level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like anything, change is inevitable. And this is just something that Koley as a firm, we view as this is the future. We like to think we're on the front end of this. I think everyone at Koley, from our attorneys to our staff to all positions, we understand that utilization of AI across the entire organization is so important to our success in the future. So we have a lot of firm-wide initiatives to use AI to try out different prompts, to have share best use cases. Recently, we actually did a Koley Jessen AI Shark Tank initiative where everyone was encouraged to upload, here's my recent use case on this, and this is how it made my life easier. We had a lot of really great back and forth and examples and knowledge sharing from that. The winners of the best prompts included got a prize, and so there's a lot of things that we can do to make it fun, to make drive engagement really. But I think at the end of the day, it gets down to everyone here knows that this is the future, and our adoption at an enterprise level is so important to where we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, et cetera.
Thanks, Griffin. Emily, I know we touched on some use cases just now, but in what other ways have you seen AI most improve your work product other than just making it more efficient and faster?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one way that's less obvious is it really makes me try to be more creative and not just accept, what the AI output does or whatever my first instinct, if I'm not using an AI tool, how to draft this provision. I'm more likely to go back and forth with it a few times and test it and have it test me. Versus if I was, drafting a document by myself, I might, use the first thing that I came up with. But here I have something to kind of test me without going to someone else first and make it the best work product I can.
Definitely. Another question that just came in and kind of goes back to my previous one. Based on your experience using Harvey to create review tables, as we showed, have you experienced errors or hallucinations from Harvey? I think, unfortunately, there are always going to be errors with the output of AI, but they have significantly improved. But as previously said, we are not, just making the assumption that everything is correct. So that's why we're double checking the provisions and what it flags, because there's sometimes cases where there may be an anti-assignment provision located in one paragraph, but later on in that agreement, it says that an assignment does constitute a change of control. And that's one primary hallucination that you may run into. Now, I will say that these programs and softwares have really gotten very good at catching all of those, but unfortunately, you do still run into them. And that is why we're reviewing the agreements no differently than before, and still not making sure that AI is just, we're taking it for its word. So Griffin, I'm gonna go one more time around for all of us. This one's speaking a little bit about disclosure to the clients. What are some of the issues surrounding disclosure to the client for the use of AI versus human work product?
Yeah, I think we're very upfront about how we plan to use AI at the engagement stage with any client that we're working with, and it's really a case by case analysis of does it make sense to use AI to lead review on a certain data set or diligence point, to help draft documents. And so a really great example, we had a client about a couple months ago now, and they were looking at whether they wanted to bid on a company, and it was a very contract heavy business, and they wanted to kind of understand the terms of the contract. So they said, hey, can you take a quick look and see what's the overall bullet points of this contract? What do we need to know? And very quickly we saw, okay, out of their thousands of contracts, every single one of them is on a different form. So there wasn't a great way to review quickly and give them the insight they needed upfront to, know what they needed to know to make an informed decision. So we said, a really great option we have here is dropping all of these agreements into Harvey and having it summarized, because they're all in different forms, and give us a high level overview of what's consistent across the documents, what is maybe differing across the documents, and then we can go from there. And they were on board for that because they love the efficiency of it rather than having, a lot of lawyers and a lot of man hours go into reviewing those. We were able to stay efficient at that stage of the process because that's what made the most sense. So I guess to summarize, we're just very communicative about it, and we want to be upfront with, we can definitely use AI in this situation, or maybe there's a situation where AI isn't the best solution, and we'd like to communicate that too.
Thanks, Griffin. And Emily, for you, I know Griffin spoke to this about at a firm-wide level, but how are you training associates, or maybe if you're reviewing someone else's work product, how are you training them to improve in using the AI so the output that they're getting is stronger than maybe previously?
Yeah, I think the base here is to really teach associates and the people that you're working with the why behind the changes that are being made, or the prompts that you're using, instead of just, having them go through the motions. And I think that was probably the case before we had these AI tools in place, instead of just, using a precedent markup to help you draft something, and helping the associate really understand why you're making certain changes. I think lets them help catch when the AI output is wrong, but also, help them be able to do that next step on their own, about, testing it and saying, how can I make this better? And, what really is the goal here, instead of just accepting what they give you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Emily. And I'll take the last question here, just speaking about the use of AI tools like Harvey with our clients as well. Understanding that, Harvey specifically does have a new product they're rolling out where you can connect your clients to also reviewing the vaults that you have as well. That is not something that we have yet put out internally, but so Harvey currently is just for the internal use at KJ, but we're very transparent with sharing the exports that we have. Although to Griffin's previous point, we are really trying to make sure that we are taking the content, the raw data that it is giving us, and cleaning it up before sending to the client so it's very digestible. So it's easier to understand and makes their review process a lot more efficient. So we haven't yet rolled out anything like that to our clients specifically.
Perfect. I see we've got a few more questions here in the chat. One of these really good ones, how do you evaluate the relative security and privacy of major AI platforms? Are there any you will not use because of this review? That's a really good question. And I think a lot of times what will happen when we're looking at AI tools is making sure they align with the model rules of professional conduct for attorneys. We need to make sure that client confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, everything remains intact, and we observe those rules to ensure the protections there. And so the tools like Harvey, like Clause, they have specific enterprise level agreements that they align with the model rules, and we're able to ensure client confidentiality. On other more open tools like, let's say, ChatGPT or Grok, anything that's just a general non-enterprise specific account that we have, we would never put any client confidential information into that. We have trainings with all of our attorneys, all of our staff, to make sure that anything that relates to real client work needs to go into one of the tools where we have those basic protections built in. All right, well, we've got a few more questions we have time for today. So if there's anything we didn't get to, we'll follow up with you directly. And if you'd like to talk further about anything AI related, AI and legal, our use of AI, anything else we didn't get to, there's a question for that as well in the survey. Just flag it there. Thanks so much for joining us today. Our employment team is up next in the series, so keep an eye out for that. Have a great day.